When Tola and Kule arrived in the UK, they started from scratch like many immigrant couples. At the time, Kule was the one working while Tola was still pursuing her nursing qualification. Life was not easy, but Tola remained focused on her studies and was determined to build a better future. What made her journey possible was the support she received from her family back in Nigeria. They contributed towards her tuition and other expenses whenever they could. Kule, her husband, did not support or sponsor her education, but Tola never heard that against him. She appreciated the fact that he was doing his best to support the household while she studied. Years later, all the sacrifices paid off. Tola graduated as a nurse and soon secured a job with a very good salary. She began earning significantly again, more than her husband. At first, Kule appeared very happy for her. He congratulated her and proudly told friends about her success, but as time passed, subtle changes began to appear. Back in Nigeria, they had an unfinished house project that Tola had been helping to fund. Whenever she sent money towards the construction, she did so willingly because she believed they were building a future together. Then, the comments started. Anytime they disagreed, even over something very little, Kule would bring up the house. So because you are helping with the building project, you think you can challenge me, right? You have started earning money again and you have changed. You think you are better than me because you are a nurse. The accusation shocked Tola. She had never used her income against him and she had never called the house hers. Yet, every contribution she made seemed to become another reason for him to resent her. Eventually, she grew tired of the constant accusations and so one evening, after another argument, she made a firm decision. She would stop contributing money to the construction project altogether. If her help would always be used against her, then she would rather step back completely. At first, Kule dismissed her decision. He was convinced she would change her mind, but weeks passed and Tola remained true to her word. That was when his attitude changed. He became unusually kind, more patient and more affectionate. Then one night he approached her with a request. My dear, if you stop what you are doing in Nigeria, everything you had already invested will be wasted. See, I am not asking you to resume funding the house. All I need is a loan from you. I promise to pay you back as soon as things stabilize. Because Tola trusted her husband, she agreed and transferred more than £20,000 to him, believing she was doing what every wife should do. A few weeks later, Kule announced that he needed to travel to Nigeria. According to him, the house project had reached a crucial stage and required his physical presence. There are things you can't supervise from the UK, he told Tola. I need to be there myself. The explanation made sense. After all, she had just trusted him with a substantial loan to complete the project. She helped him pack. She drove him to the airport. She kissed him goodbye and reminded him to call as soon as he landed. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. Kule called regularly. He sent videos of workers mixing cement and laying tiles. He even walked around the property during video calls, proudly showing her the progress. Tola felt relieved, but after a few weeks, things began to change. The calls became shorter. The messages became less frequent. Whenever she asked for updates, there was always an excuse. The network was bad, the workers were causing problems, or he was busy dealing with suppliers. At first, she ignored all the signs. She told herself he was simply under pressure. Then one evening, she called him several times without success. Hours later, he returned the call. His voice sounded cold, different and distant. Before Tola could ask what was wrong, Kule said something that made her heart stop. I am not coming back, oh. At first, she thought she had just heard him incorrectly. What do you mean by you are not coming back? I mean exactly what I said, he replied. The silence that followed felt endless. Tola waited for him to explain, to laugh and say it was a joke, but instead he delivered another blow. I have moved on with my life. The words felt like a knife twisting inside her chest. Years of marriage, years of sacrifice, and years of trust, all reduced to a few careless sentences. As if that wasn't enough, the truth soon began to emerge. Through mutual acquaintances in Nigeria, Tola discovered that Kunle had secretly married another woman. The same house she had helped finance, the same house she had loaned him money to complete. That was where he was now living with his new wife. The betrayal was so shocking that Tola could barely sleep. Some days she cried, and other days she sat in silence, staring into the space. Friends expected her to fight, to scream, to threaten him, and to drag him on social media, but Tola did none of those things. Instead, she surprised everyone. The next time Kunle called, she sounded calm, almost cheerful. "Okay, my love," she said. "If that's what you want, then it's fine." Kunle was relieved. He assumed she had accepted defeat. He assumed he was weak, and he assumed she would eventually move on. What he didn't know was that Tola had just begun planning the most important mission of her life, and unlike him, she was willing to be patient. While Kunle celebrated his new marriage in Nigeria, she quietly began gathering every piece of information she could find, because before going to war, she intended to know exactly where her enemy was standing. At first, the reports were confusing. Everyone seemed to know a different version of the story, but as she connected the pieces together, a clearer picture began to emerge. Kunle had not simply moved on. He had been planning this for a long time. The woman he married was not someone he met after arriving in Nigeria. She had been in his life much earlier, and Tola felt her stomach tighten whenever she heard new details. Each revelation felt like another knife wound, but still, she remained focused. One evening, after finishing a long nursing shift, she sat down with a notebook. For the first time, she began writing everything she knew: debts, money transfers, messages, photographs, witnesses, construction payments, bank records, property discussions. Every single detail went into that notebook. If she was going to fight back, then she needed facts, not emotions. Weeks turned into months, and during those months, something unexpected happened. Tola changed. The woman who had once cried every night gradually became stronger. Instead of spending her free time mourning the marriage, she worked extra shifts. She accepted overtime whenever it was available. She reduced unnecessary spending. She created a savings target and focused on it with determination. The more she worked, the less time she had to dwell on her pain. Meanwhile, life appeared to be going perfectly for Kunle. According to the information reaching her, the house project was finally complete, and he had moved in with his new lover. Whenever she imagined them living there together, anger burned inside her, but she refused to act impulsively. Then one afternoon, a phone call changed everything. One of her informants from Nigeria called her and told her that the woman was pregnant. The caller continued talking, but Tola barely heard anything else. After ending the call, she sat quietly in her car. Not because she was heartbroken. That stage had passed. What she felt now was something entirely different. For months, she had been gathering information. For months, she had been watching. For months, she had been waiting. Now she knew exactly what she needed to do. As she got home and opened her notebook, she reviewed every detail she had collected, every receipt, every bank transfer, and every piece of evidence. The house existed largely because of her money. Without her contributions and the massive loan she had given Kunle, the project would likely never have been completed. As she flipped through the pages, a realization settled firmly in her mind. Kunle believed she had accepted defeat. He believed she was powerless because she remained in the UK. He believed distance would protect him, and most importantly, he believed she would never come to Nigeria. The following day, she submitted a request for annual leave. She did not tell her friends. She did not tell her enemies, and she certainly did not tell Kunle. Everything remained a secret. Her leave was approved. Now all she needed was money. Fortunately, she had spent months preparing. The savings account she had been building quietly was now substantial. Over the next several days, she made careful arrangements. She researched, she contacted people and she gathered more information. The day she finally boarded her flight to Nigeria, she felt strangely calm. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, she stared through the window and thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The countless nursing shifts, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the years she had invested in a marriage she believed would last forever. And then she thought about Kunle, the man who had looked into her eyes and promised to repay her loan. The man who had accepted her money. The man who had used that money to complete a house and start another family. Sadly, a family that did not include her. For a brief moment, anger surged through her chest. Then she took a deep breath because anger could make someone careless and she could not afford mistakes. Not now and not when she had come this far. Several hours later, her plane landed in Lagos. The first few days were spent quietly gathering final pieces of information. She did not go anywhere near the house. She did not contact Kunle. She did not announce her arrival to anyone connected to him. Instead, she focused on facts. One contact led to another. One conversation revealed another detail, and before long, she had a complete picture of what had happened. Kunle was living comfortably inside the completed mansion. The new wife was heavily pregnant, and most of the neighbors believed she was the legitimate wife. To outsiders, they looked like a normal, happy family. That alone disgusted Tola because the life they were enjoying had been financed largely by her sacrifices. Yet they carried on as if she had never existed. One afternoon, she met with a trusted family friend who had extensive knowledge of property matters. Together, they reviewed every soft copy document she had gathered. Bank transfers, construction receipts, payment confirmations, and other things. The man sat quietly for several minutes, and when he finally looked up, he said, "You were deeply involved in financing that project. With what I've seen so far, you can claim the property anytime, any day." For the first time since arriving in Nigeria, Tola felt genuine confidence, especially knowing that her months of preparation were finally paying off. The following evening, she contacted a trusted acquaintance, someone who knew people capable of handling difficult situations. Not criminals and not thugs, just men whose presence alone could discourage unnecessary resistance. She explained that she needed assistance recovering important property documents from a man who had a history of deception. The acquaintance listened carefully, and when she was done, he asked, "How many people do you need?" "Well, 4 or 5 men is okay." The man smiled, and within 24 hours, he made arrangements. Around 4:30 a.m. on the set day, she got dressed, and by 5 a.m., she was seated inside a vehicle with the several men. As they drove, memories flooded her mind. Memories of conversations about their dream home, memories of construction updates, memories of sending money, memories of trust, and every memory strengthened her resolve. Finally, they arrived. The mansion stood exactly as she had imagined. Large, beautiful, and finished. The sight almost made her laugh. For years, she had imagined living there with her husband. Now she was standing outside as a stranger. Indeed, life had a cruel sense of humor. One of the men approached the gates. Moments later, movement began inside the compound. Lights switched on. Voices could be heard. Then the gates opened. The look on Kunle's face when he saw Tola was priceless. For several seconds, he simply stared as if he had seen a ghost. Tola. His voice sounded weak and disbelieving. "What are you doing here?" Tola smiled calmly, and then she replied, "Well, I came to see my investments." Kule immediately became uncomfortable. His eyes moved from her to the men standing nearby, then back to her. "What's the meaning of this?" Tola ignored the question. Instead, she looked around the compound. What she saw looked impressive, especially when she remembered who had helped pay for it. By now, the pregnant wife had appeared behind Kunle. Confusion covered her face, and it was so obvious that she had no idea who Tola was. For a brief moment, Tola felt sympathy for her because despite everything, the woman was carrying a child who had done nothing wrong, but sympathy would not change facts, and facts were the reason she had come. Tola returned her attention to Kule. I need the property documents. The color immediately drained from his face. What documents? The documents of this house. Okay, they are not here. The response came too quickly and too rehearsed. Madam of the Moment laughed. Months earlier, she might have believed him, but not anymore. She took a step forward and said, Kunle, don't do this because you won't like the outcome. I am telling you the truth. The documents are not here. Silence followed. The men who had accompanied Tola exchanged glances because everyone knew what was happening. Kunle was capping exactly as expected. Tola sighed. Then she looked towards the men and gave a small signal. Suddenly, Kunle's confidence disappeared because he knew these ones were handling him like a child. The realization finally hit him. Tola had not come to argue, she had not come to cry, and she had not come to beg. His eyes darted around nervously. For the first time since abandoning his wife, genuine fear appeared on his face, and in that moment, Tola knew that the balance of power had changed completely. Tola, let's discuss this like adults, he said. Tola folded her hands. I am discussing it like an adult already. No, I don't think so. You are just creating unnecessary tension. Unnecessary? Is that what you call collecting over £20,000 from your wife, marrying another woman, and moving into a house financed with her own money? Kule said nothing, but the silence spoke for him. The pregnant woman standing behind him looked confused. It was becoming obvious that she had never been told the complete story. Her eyes moved repeatedly between Kunle and Tola, trying to understand what was happening and trying to understand why this woman standing in her compound seemed to know so much. Tola noticed the confusion. For the first time, she spoke directly to her. Did he tell you where the money for this house came from? Did he ever tell you that he's married with kids? The woman became shocked instantly. She looked at Kunle, then back at Tola. She couldn't say anything, and that alone told Tola everything she needed to know. Another lie, another secret, and another victim. The realization softened her heart slightly. The woman might be living in the house, but she was clearly not the mastermind behind what had happened. Kule was, and Kule would answer for it. Tola returned her attention to him. Last chance, she said. Bring out the documents. Kule shook his head. I told you already, they are not here. The answer came out weaker this time, less convincing and almost desperate. One of the men who had accompanied Tola stepped forward and played his part. Guess what? The effect was immediate. Kule swallowed hard. His confidence vanished completely, and then he told them that he would bring it. They led him inside, and a few minutes later, the same documents that were supposedly not in the house suddenly appeared. Tola almost laughed. The folder was handed over. She opened it carefully. She reviewed the contents slowly and then handed them to someone she trusted for verification. Several minutes passed. Nobody spoke until confirmation came that the documents were genuine. For the first time that morning, Tola felt a sense of relief because now she knew she had not traveled all the way from the United Kingdom for nothing. The evidence she needed was finally in her hands, but she was not finished. She looked around the compound one more time. The expensive finishing, the lustrous fittings, and the beautifully painted walls. Everything represented years of sacrifice, years of trust, years of hard work, and the irony was almost painful. She had contributed so much towards building this place, yet she had never spent a single night there. Meanwhile, the man who betrayed her was enjoying the benefits every day. The unfairness of it all hit her again. Then she said, I give you 24 hours to pack just your clothes and leave here. She pointed at three men who will be on a standby just to be sure he doesn't leave with any other thing. The pregnant wife suddenly stepped forward. Her eyes were filled with tears. Please, she said. Tola looked at her. Please what? The woman hesitated, then her voice broke. I don't know anything. Tola remained silent. I swear to you, I didn't know. Still, Tola said nothing. The woman continued. I'm about to have a baby. Her hands rested protectively on her stomach. We don't have anywhere else to go to. For a brief moment, the entire compound became silent. Even the men standing nearby seemed to be waiting for Tola's response. Deep inside, she felt sympathy. How could she not? An unborn child was involved. A woman was pleading. A family was facing uncertainty, but another part of her remembered something important. Nobody had shown her mercy when she was betrayed. Nobody had worried about her future when her husband abandoned her. Nobody had asked where she would live emotionally after her marriage collapsed, and nobody had cared when her life savings disappeared into another household. The painful truth was that every decision carried consequences, and sometimes innocent people suffered because of choices made by others. She looked directly at the woman and said, I am so sorry for your situation. The woman immediately nodded hopefully. However, your situation is not my responsibility. I didn't create this problem. The person who created this problem is standing beside you. Everyone's eyes turned towards Kunle. For once, he had absolutely nothing to say. No excuses, no explanations, no speeches, nothing. Tola took a step forward. Her voice became firmer. This house cannot continue to be occupied as if nothing happened. Kunle finally found his voice. What exactly do you want? Tola looked at him for several seconds, then she gave her answer. 24 hours. Kunle blinked. But that's too urgent and you know it. At least give us 72 hours. 24 hours, she backed, and that is final. The pregnant woman began crying. Kunle stared at his former wife as if he had never seen her before. Perhaps he hadn't, because the woman standing before him was not the same woman he abandoned. That woman was gone. This woman had crossed an ocean carrying evidence, determination, and courage. And this woman right here was no longer afraid of him. Then Tola said the words he will remember for the rest of his life. Where your wickedness stops is where another person's own begins. You have 24 hours. With that, she turned and began walking away. The next 24 hours passed exactly as Tola expected. For Kunle, they felt like a nightmare, but for Tola, they felt like the final stage of a journey she had begun the day her husband told her he was never coming back to the UK. She spent the night reviewing documents and speaking with professionals she trusted. There was no room for mistakes. She had come too far to allow emotion to interfere with her judgments. Everything had to be done properly. Everything had to be supported by evidence, and everything had to be documented. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, panic had taken over. Kunle barely slept. His mind raced endlessly. For months, he had convinced himself that his former wife was weak. He believed she would cry, complain, and eventually move on. He never imagined she would return to Nigeria with proof of her financial contributions, records of transfers, and enough determination to challenge everything he had built. The realization terrified him. Even worse, he was now being forced to answer difficult questions from the woman he had married after abandoning Tola. Exactly 24 hours later, Tola returned. This time, she was accompanied by professionals handling the next phase of the plan. When Kunle saw her arrive, his face immediately tightened. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Tola finally broke the silence. Remember, I gave you 24 hours. Kunle lowered his eyes. The response was barely audible. I know, but Tola, don't do this. Remember all we have shared in the past. That statement angered her. She immediately gave sign, and those men carried the bags out and carried them as well. She changed the keys and paid off all those that were hired to work there. Over the following days, discussions continued. Documents were reviewed, evidence was presented, records of financial contributions were examined carefully, and every payment she contributed towards the construction project was documented. The evidence spoke for itself. For years, she had invested in a future she believed she would share with her husband. Instead, that future had been handed to another woman. She put up the property for sales, and eventually a buyer emerged because it was a beautiful house in a desirable location. When Kule heard about it, he became angry and helpless. The house he believed would secure his future was slipping away, brick by brick, signature by signature, document by document, and for the first time he fully understood the consequences of his actions. The irony was impossible to miss. Years earlier, he had accused Tola of acting superior because she contributed to the construction. He complained whenever she helped. He mocked her efforts. He resented her success. Yet, the same financial contributions he dismissed were now the reason she possessed evidence powerful enough to challenge him. The day ownership was officially transferred, Tola stood quietly watching the final paperwork being completed. She expected to feel excitement. She expected to feel triumph. Instead, she felt peace because, contrary to what people believed, this journey had never been about revenge. It was about justice, and there is a huge difference. Revenge seeks destruction, while justice seeks accountability. The moment the process was completed, a chapter of her life officially ended and another opened. She saw how much she made from just selling one property, and that was how she ventured into real estate as she got back to the UK. Back in Nigeria, life became increasingly difficult for Kunle. Financial pressure mounted, relationships became strained, and the same confidence that once defined him disappeared. Months later, he explored the possibility of taking legal action. He desperately wanted a way to recover what he had lost. Unfortunately for him, the people he consulted were brutally honest. After reviewing the circumstances, they explained the weaknesses in his position. The financial records existed, the transfers existed, the evidence existed. The questions he would be forced to answer in court were questions he could not answer comfortably. The more he listened, the clearer the situation became. His case was weak, very weak, and so he eventually abandoned the idea altogether. Years passed. Tola continued building her life. Her nursing career flourished. She found happiness again, not because someone rescued her, but because she refused to allow betrayal to define her future. As for Kunle, things never quite returned to the way he imagined they would. Finances became unstable, struggles multiplied, and every now and then he remembered the words Tola spoke on that unforgettable morning. Where your weakness stops is where another person's own begins. You learned a painful lesson from it. The greatest mistake you can make is assuming that a good person has no limits, because when good people finally stop tolerating injustice, the consequences can change everything. Till today, he is still struggling to find his feet because he is the salt and pepper in his marriage, as his new wife is a proper "I will sit and wait for my husband" kind of wife. So, my dear Kamma tribe, let's settle this once and for all. Was Tola fighting for justice, or was she simply taking revenge? If you were in her shoes, would you have done the same thing or walked away and left everything to God? I want to hear your honest opinion in the comments. Don't forget to give the story a thumbs up, share to your loved ones, and if you have not subscribed to this channel, kindly punch on that subscribe button so that you can join the Kamma tribe free of charge. Until I bring the next interesting story your way, it's a goodbye from here, and God bless you.